There'll be now a subsection 1 under that, which will read, the number of times during the previous fiscal year that, under subsection 15.2, bracket 6, an order prevailed over decision of the Commission made under this Act.
While you're getting the language, could I just ask ISED officials if that changes in any way or if it really is just technical, if they deem it to change in any way the intention of what was passed prior while we're figuring out the specific language here?
Would someone like to respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. No, I don't see an operational problem with this text. It actually had been discussed in the last session, but might have gotten lost maybe in some of the line overlap there. It refers to a provision in the bill that is a for greater clarity provision that just says, in the event of an inconsistency between an order under this section and a decision of the CRTC, the security order prevails. This just adds an element to the reporting that says we need to include in a report should that happen. It's very unlikely that this will happen, but it's not a problem to report on it should it does.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And the first one,
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say I'm very impressed with the coordination of yourself and our witnesses with the suits today. I did not get the memo, so I wore a blue suit. I apologize for that. But I'm very impressed. I haven't seen that degree of coordination in a long time.
Or a good day.
good. You know?
Are you guys okay with that? Consent NDP 7 is fine, which we're good to go. Mr. Shipley.
Thank you for that, and sorry for the delay. The next one, I'm sorry. Thank you again, and sorry, everyone. The next one is to correct also in NDP 7, paragraph 3. We've been informed we need to delete after act during previous fiscal year, delete the following, and must cause the report to be tabled before each House of Parliament on any of the first 15 days on which the House is sitting after the report is completed. Deleting that part.
That's good. Okay, it's considered good.
Well,
And
that
you have
was a
one
lot
more?
easier, yes. And we need to reopen G 6.2. We need to add a subsection, add subsection 3 to G 6.2 that the report must also state the number of times that an order prevailed over decision of the Commission made under this Act during the previous fiscal year. That would be an addition. Paragraph 3.
I'm sorry, are you adding a paragraph 3?
Yes.
Move on. Is that good? Okay, thank you, Mr. Shipley. Now moving to clause 12. Yes. Ms. O'Connell.
For government 6.4, sorry, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead.
You are, but that's okay.
Okay, sorry.
We know you're hungry. Go ahead.
I am.
Yes.
I was getting ready to withdraw. I'm just.
Are you going to with, okay.
That's all.
Well, let's get started then. G 6.4, and you're withdrawing it? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're moving to clause 13, correct? G7. Any discussion? Shall G7 carry? Oh, Carol.
Okay. So,
Pushing it along, so we have to, if you can spare a couple seconds, we're going to go back to clause 12 and as amended, or just carried? Just carried. Okay. Now we'll move to clause 13.
yes.
G7. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Julian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask our terrifically coordinated witnesses what the impact would be of taking out private. I understand the need to capture Crown corporations in this. I'm wondering if there are any unintended consequences that may be of concern in terms of what that means for private companies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. No, it was exactly for that reason. The unintended consequence, unfortunately, with including the word private in there, is that some federally regulated Crown corporations may not be captured, and so we wanted to expand the language to ensure that they were included to capture the breadth of all federally regulated sectors.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Ms. O'Connell.
I just move it, just catching up, but, and the explanation is exactly that, just removing the word private.
Carried. G8. Ms. O'Connell.
Same, Mr. Chair, I'll move that, and again, it's the same as G7. The rationale is to remove the word private from federally regulated private sector just to expand and ensure everything is captured.
Shall G8 carry? Carried. G9. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll move this, and it's just to correct a drafting error to ensure that publicly owned and operated organizations can also be captured, similar to G7 and 8.
Shall G9 carry? Yes. Thank you. G9.1. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. We're moving so fast, I just have to catch up with my notes, but I'll move this again, and it's essentially to ensure that the federal government can enter into agreements with provincial and territorial governments. So it's to include as one of the provisions with provinces and territories. That's the language it's adding.
Thank you. Shall G9.1 carry? Yes. G10. Ms. O'Connell. I'll slow down.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you.
Chair?
Yes.
I'll move this one. And maybe the officials could just explain to us how this preserves the due diligence defense, which is the intent of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So the amendments will reinforce the policy intent of these sections, which was to create a strict liability offense for contravening the Act and ensure the applicability of a due diligence defense. Strict liability is where the defendant is liable for the offenses regardless of their intent. For example, in drug possession cases, it is assumed someone found in possession of drugs has committed this offense and they are responsible to prove their innocence. In the case of the CCSPA, for example, you could say a designated operator failed to establish a cybersecurity program within the 90 days designated under the Act. This is a punishable offense. So as currently written, the Crown must demonstrate that the designated operator did not meet this requirement. Instead, and what was originally intended, is that the amendment would assume the offense occurred and the designated operator would then have the opportunity to prove otherwise in a judicial review process by showing they tried to comply. This is otherwise known as the due diligence defense.
Thank you. I think that's what we need in this, in the amendments needed to make sure that due diligence defense is in the legislation.
Thank you. Shall G10 carry? Yes. Carry. BQ12.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, BQ12 vise à...
Thank you. BQ12 seeks to avoid doing the same thing twice. There are already organizations that have a cybersecurity program, and this addition in the legislation seeks that they would be exempted from some of the requirements in terms of cybersecurity. According to Electricity Canada, it wouldn't improve infrastructure that's already in place. They were talking about standards that had already been put in place, that are already applied. And so that's the purpose of that amendment.
Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to any of the officials who could answer on this. Would this effectively mean that then a designated operator could determine themselves if they meet the threshold and therefore wouldn't be subject? I understand the intention. I just want to make sure that there isn't kind of a self-regulating saying, oh, we have these cyber security policies and therefore, no need to look here sort of thing. That's how I am reading it, but perhaps you could elaborate if this is of concern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. We absolutely appreciate the intent behind this provision. However, I think an unintended consequence could be that it would effectively allow designated operators to determine themselves whether their existing cybersecurity programs meet the requirements of the CCSBA and whether they are therefore obligated to comply with the obligations regarding the cybersecurity programs. Unfortunately, this would undermine the purpose of the CCSBA, which is to ensure that all designated operators meet a base level of cybersecurity.
Julian, please.
Mais moi, je sais très bien que l'intention.
I understand that the intention of this amendment is a good one, but the designated operators could classify themselves, and so I'm afraid I can't support this amendment.
Okay. Anybody else? Any further discussion? We'll vote on this amendment? Yeah? All right. All those in favor? All those against? Defeated. Okay. You guys good? G11. Ms. O'Connell, please.
Thank you. This amendment, again, is dealing with the prescribed time frame for notification of changes. We had lots of discussion around this, and I think the proposed language, which would be within a period prescribed by the regulations instead of without delay, will provide more clarity, and not every industry will require the same time frames. Some might be more complicated than others, and through regulations, I think industry would probably welcome the ability to have those conversations, and so we just think this language achieves the same things but provides a little bit more certainty to the private sector or those who might have to comply under this.
Thank you. Discussion? No? Shall G11 carry? G12. Ms. O'Connell.
Sure, thanks. Again, this removes the reference to reasonable steps in section 15. And this would then allow for that availability of a due diligence defense and just, again, provides more clarity to what we believe the intention of this bill is, but based on feedback, just want to put in some language that would ease some of those concerns.
Thank you. No discussion. Shall G12 carry? BQ 13. Ms. Michaud, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. BQ 13 is quite simple. There are a number of stakeholders that asked us to better protect information, data, and so this amendment seeks to increase confidence in information sharing. It really just seeks to strengthen the use of information that's collected.
So if BQ 13 is moved, CPC 19 cannot be moved as they are identical, which I should have read out before you did your comments, but my apologies. So, shall BQ carry? BQ 13 carry? Yep, certainly. Mr.
I just was wondering if the officials had any comment on BQ 13 and its potential of limiting CSE's information. using information only for cybersecurity purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. And I think first off, it is important to note that CSE would not receive any new authorities under the Act. It would leverage our existing mandate under the CSE Act, so Section 16 of the Act, for cybersecurity and information assurance to provide technical advice, guidance, and services both to designated operators and Government of Canada partners. So information collected by CSE pursuant to one aspect of our mandate can be used by CSE under another aspect of the mandate, as long as it meets specific conditions set out in the CSE Act. Information related to security programs will enable CSE and its Cyber Center to gain a better understanding of the supply chain risk of designated operators, as well as the intentions of a foreign entity via its penetration into respective sectors. Without being able to leverage CSE's mandate as a whole, CSE's understanding of foreign actors' intentions against our critical infrastructure and the proper strategic mitigations would be greatly diminished. Any limitation would also reduce CSE's collaboration with our Five Eyes partners. So I would suggest that this amendment may not be necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. Yes,
Mr. Chair, on a point of order.
just one moment, Mr. McKinnon, please. Oh, sorry. He can, okay. Go ahead, Mr. McKinnon.
Yeah, not in the room, I can't really tell how the vote's going, so I don't really know if G12 carried or not. I wonder if you could be sure to announce the results each time. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Ms. O'Connell, please.
Thank you. Just on this amendment, well, again, I understand the rationale. I just think for members' benefit, we also agree in the sense that any collection of data should not be used for surveillance purposes. So I just want to point members to our changes in G 9.1 and eventually 14.2, which will reiterate that. So we won't be supporting this amendment, but we do agree and want to put the point home that this legislation is not, as the officials have pointed out, is not to create a new like surveillance mandate. So that's why we won't be supporting it, but I think it's important we point to those other amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Shall BQ 13 carry? No. Vote? Show of hands, please. All those in favor? Okay. All those against? Defeated. We're now moving on to NDP 10. If NDP 10 is moved, BQ 14 and CPC 20 cannot be moved as they are identical. Also, if NDP 10 is adopted, G13 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. Mr. Julian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is regarding the issue of C26 currently asking designated operators to immediately report a cybersecurity incident. The reality is, as we've heard from testimony, Canadian Chamber of Commerce notably, and other witnesses talked about a 72-hour reporting period, so immediate being defined as 72 hours. And it's important to note that in the U.S., the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act also talks about a 72-hour reporting time frame. Our witnesses said very clearly that immediately made it potentially difficult for them to resolve the issue, to respond to the cyber attack, because they would be concerned about the impacts of not reporting in that immediate time frame. A 72-hour window is something that provides for the ability to combat the cybersecurity incident and do the reporting in a very timely way. So I'd like to move what we heard from witnesses and move NDP 10 to essentially provide an amendment that the designated operator must report the cybersecurity incident within 72 hours from the time the operator reasonably believes the incident occurred.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Any further discussions? Ms. O'Connell, please. French fries.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm making everyone jealous. I think all parties have submitted something in terms of dealing with the time frame. So I think we all are in agreement on the intent and removing immediately from as not being clear enough. But I think we still prefer G13, which again creates a period prescribed by regulations that could also address, again, industry differences. But I'm open to hearing the conversation because obviously we're not on G13 yet. But perhaps through the chair to officials, what happens if 72 hours is adopted? And in some industries, for example, banking might be one where they could comply quite easily, but telecom, by the time they track down what the issue might be, is that going to be a problem? Or is this too prescriptive, not prescriptive enough? I guess I just want to get a sense of what we think will be achieved with this. Also, given that all parties are concerned about the initial drafting of the language and how do we come to a better consensus of what it should be replaced with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So on the timeline for the mandatory reporting, probably one of the benefits of moving it into regulations, as you mentioned, is that it does allow for more flexibility, not just in consideration of the different sectors and their abilities, but also in terms of changes down the road. If we codify it in legislation, obviously we would have to go through the legislative process to amend that at any point. Whereas if there was a need to change it in 3, 5, 10 years' time, doing that in regulations is a more straightforward process, I suppose.
With that being said, and I agree, if things change and things should happen faster or need more time, I like the idea of being able to do it through regulations instead of opening up the legislation altogether. So I won't support this amendment, but look forward to hopefully G13 unless there is something kind of discussed here. I don't know where my other colleagues stand on the differences.
Thank you. I'm not generally a fan of hiding everything in regulations, but it makes total sense to have some flexibility with respect to the different aspects that we're dealing with here. It's not just one stream. We're dealing with a lot of different players. And so I think it makes sense in this case to put it in regs. So I won't be supporting this one, but I will be supporting G13.
Well, I'm going to push back against the coalition a bit, just in the sense that, first off, we do have within the idea of a 72-hour reporting period harmonization with existing regimes, such as in the United States. So the reporting mechanism is already in place in the United States and well understood. It is also, I think, incumbent on us to listen to the witnesses who came forward that talked about the 72-hour reporting period. As my friend Mr. Motz pointed out, it's less transparent when it's in regulation. And the reality is governments of the day are able to tweak legislation if 10 years down the road it is something that requires some tweaking. There are a variety of ways of doing that. So I guess I would suggest that the 72-hour reporting mechanism is reasonable, an improvement on what it currently exists in the bill. It is in keeping with our major trading partner, who has in place exactly that same legislation, and it responds to what we repeatedly heard from witnesses, which was that a 72-hour reporting period was reasonable and something that they believed would allow the bill to be effective and also allow entities to respond to the urgency of a cyber attack and respond in a timely way. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to the committee to decide.
Thank you, With no, oh, Ms. O'Connell, please.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Just a couple points. First, there's nothing to prescribe, even if we don't pass this amendment and go with G13. There's nothing to say that maybe a 72-hour reporting time wouldn't be the thing determined based on a particular sector. So I hear Mr. Julian's point about consistency with our allies. I don't disagree, but I think that can be determined through consultations and regulations as well. But with that being said, I'm just also, I forgot to ask earlier, but through the chair to our officials, in terms of the other line that I kind of have some concerns with this amendment is not just the 72 hours, but from the time the operator reasonably believes the incident occurred. I would have some concerns about relying on when the operator is determining the start of that clock. I don't know if I'm alone in that. Could we perhaps get some commentary on that line in the amendment as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Yes, I think that's a valid point. When we reviewed the draft wording, that was one of the unintended consequences that was raised. It could leave crucial aspects of Canada's cybersecurity, the timeliness of cyber incident reporting, up to the discretion of the operators themselves. And even if in a scenario, I guess based on the previous amendments, even if in a scenario where this wasn't the case, if there was some concern by the operators, the due diligence offense would still apply. So anyway, sorry, long story short, I think your concern is quite valid.
Good. Thank you. Mr. Motz, please. You're good? Mr. Shipley.
Just quickly to speed things up a little bit, we will not be supporting NDP 10, but we'll be supporting G13.
With amendment.
With an amendment from Mr. Motz.
Shipley, any further discussion on NDP 10? I'll ask for a vote, a show of hands. Those in favor? Those against? Defeated. G13 can only be moved if NDP 10 was defeated. Also, if G13 is adopted, is defeated. Do you want this?
Yes, because
Ms. O'Connell?
I'll move it but for the sake of time, I think we've had the conversations and my comments earlier about the change is needed, but I think we should get into the different reporting timeframes through regulations.
Please.
I would agree, and if the parties are amicable to it, a sub-amendment that would put in the regulations talk about within because the witnesses talked about a 72-hour time period, and we can put that in the regs in some way, shape, or form to ensure that timeline has been honored, but it's in the regs. No, I'm not contradictory. I'm saying that we need to do it some way, but having some flexibility is the way we got to do it, not in the act itself.
Please.
I agree with Mr. Motz. I believe he's moving a motion of reconsideration on NDP 10. Well, the 72 hours, in terms of regulation, I believe we could provide some guidance on the regs, but it would be safer and clearer if we just had the 72 hours written into the legislation.
Ms. Dem, off, please.
Go ahead, Jen. Sorry, I'm going to defer.
Ms. O'Connell.
Thanks. Throwing it out there, we can have some discussion actually, and I would like to include it with officials, but if we included something along the lines of not to exceed 72 hours, would that be, again, the intention in terms of speed, but in a way that could allow, through regulations, the industry-specific or sector-specific? Could I maybe ask before I move that language? But before I move that language, could I just make sure that would actually be achievable through the chair to maybe Mr. McSween or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Yes, that at work we could put that in regulations. For the committee's consideration, so I think part of the rationale for recommending it be moved to regulations was to allow for flexibility, not just in changing it, but actually between recognizing the differences in sectors as well too. So when we did our consultations, we heard very clearly from the energy sector, for example, that they were very interested in a 72-hour time frame because obviously of the cross-border linkages of the international pipelines, so for example with the U.S. And so that certainly made a lot of sense there. We would like to take the opportunity through the regulatory process to do sort of in-depth consultations with the other impacted parties in order to determine that that reporting requirement will work for them in a way that is best placed for their sector. Just with that in mind, then another possible consideration could be in consideration of the reporting timelines of major partners or something to that effect.
Donald.
And I agree and support. It's the whole rationale of supporting the idea around having some of that flexibility while not losing the intention of speed is a necessity. So in the event, if we added or if the Conservatives move a sub-amendment to include not to exceed, and let's say there was a sector that had issues, could you come back within the regs on dealing with that, or is that kind of the floor or ceiling, I guess, depending who you are in terms of looking at that time frame?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I believe it was codified in such a way as to say, I forget the exact wording, but within 72 hours, I feel like we'd be bound to that. However, that could make sense in the circumstance. And as I understand it, I believe the proposal is for that to be captured in regulations, so that could also be amended through the regulatory process as well, too.
Mr. Motz, please.
So would it work if we inserted some language to not exceed, but make it sector specific, and also in circumstances to not exceed or within 72 hours? But again, give flexibility within the wording. I don't know how to think of that right now, but flexibility in the wording that will allow for energy-specific time adjustments, but within 72 hours if possible. Is that something that's workable?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Yes, I believe that would be workable.
Good. Everybody good? So that was my next.
So within 72, so at the end of this, within a period prescribed by regulations, within 72 hours.
Could we maybe park this one, work on a little bit of language, and come back? I just don't want to do it on the fly. I think our intentions are good, and then it allows us just to kind of work on the proper language without having to do it like this.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Because Clause 13 may have effect on other parts of this, so we're going to suspend for about 2 or 3 minutes here and just get some language around this. Suspend. I will ask Mr. Motts to read out his amendment to G13 for the record.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at paragraph 17 there, a designated operator must, within a period prescribed by the regulations, not to exceed 72 hours. We've taken out the the specific sector because the regulations require a consultation with sector-specific operators anyway. So not to exceed 72 hours.
Any further discussion on this? Good. Mr. Julian.
Just if so not to exceed, a designated officer, operator must, within a period not to exceed 72 hours, right? Yeah, I support this.
Thank you, Mr. Julian.
amendment.
Mr. McKinnon, your hand's up.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering if there are any industries that require a longer period, or whether that's really acceptable as a maximum.
The bedroom. I don't want to vote with it.
Yes, Mr. McSween, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So during our consultations, that was probably one of the points that was raised the most was harmonization with the requirement of CISA in the U.S., which is the 72-hour requirement. I don't recall any other input specifically that suggested anything longer would be needed.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. O'Connell, please.
Chair, thank you. Just to clarify, I think the issue is not the 72 hours for us per se, because we do want to ensure that we can have consistency with the U.S. The issue in the previous motion was really around when that clock started ticking, being at the kind of the operator's discretion. So we're very happy to support the 72-hour amendment.
Okay. No further discussion. So we vote on the sub-amendment. All those in favor? All those against? None. Okay. And now we'll go back to the original motion. Yes, oh, sorry. Mr. Brock?
Thank you. I'd like to move a motion at this time, Mr. Chair. It has been distributed to the clerk in both official languages.
We need to finish G13, Mr. Brock, before you can move that motion.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, back to the...
Point of order, did the sub-amendment pass? I didn't hear that.
Yes, carried.
Thank you.
Back to G13, original motion. Any further discussion on it? Shall G13 carried as amended? Yeah. Carried. Okay, Mr. Brock, please.
Thank you, Chair. The motion in both official languages reads as follows, that given that under the current NDP Liberal government, car thefts across Canada have surged by 34%, and that the Insurance Bureau of Canada, IBC, has deemed the number of car thefts a national crisis, stating that insurers have had to pay out record numbers, and these costs are passed directly on to Canadians, costing every driver an extra $130 per year. And recently reported in the media, a Montrealer went through hell in March when his car was stolen twice in just 3 weeks. The committee reports to the House that Canada is facing a national auto theft crisis and requests that the Minister of Public Safety appear before the committee for no less than 3 hours in relation to the ongoing auto theft study.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connell, please.
Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn debate on this motion.
All in favor? All in favor? All in favor? Mr. Clerk.
Ms. O'Connell? Yes. Mr. McKinnon?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. Dama?
Yes.
Mr. Chen?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
No.
Mr. Lloyd?
No.
Mr. Mutz?
No.
Mr. Brock?
No.
Madame Michaud?
En faveur.
Monsieur Julian?
No.
Just defeated.
So adopted. Adopted.
6-5.
6-5.
6-5 is defeated.
Adopted.
Or, I'm favor. Sorry. All right. Can we move on? Okay, he took his hand down. Yeah. CPC 21, right?
Yes.
You ready, Doug? CPC 21?
And CPC 20 are toast, right?
Right.
I'd like to move CPC 21, please. Now I've lost two. We did go quick and then slow.
It's all right.
This amendment will require a designated operator to notify the regulator of a cyber incident within 24 hours instead of immediately.
Any discussion? Mr. Julian? Did you have your hand up? Okay.
A little confused by the conservative amendment. But, perhaps Mr. Shipley could explain a little bit more the discrepancy between the 72 hours we were speaking of earlier and the 24 hours targeted by their amendment.
Chair?
Mr. Julian, back to Mr. Shipley, please.
After Mr. Motz's amendment last one, we're going to ask for UC to withdraw that CPC 21. Sorry about that, everyone.
Unanimous consent? We good? Withdrawn. NDP 11.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will flag that I'm going to be trying if as we go along, there's a number of NDP amendments. I'm going to be withdrawing a number of them just in the interest of moving forward. But in this particular case, it would be deleting on request for a designated operator to report to the appropriate regulator. It shouldn't be on request. It should be mandatory. And that's why I am proposing this amendment.
Any discussion on NDP 11? No? Shall NDP 11 carry? Yes. Carried. CPC 21.1.
Thank you, Chair. This one we will be moving, CPC 21.1. That is, this would require operators to report ransomware payments to the CSE. There is currently no requirement to report payments to the CSE in the legislation. The CSE has often remarked that ransomware payments go underreported. This will align with the United States version of this bill.
Any further discussion? Ms. O'Connell, please.
Thank you. I would just actually like to ask through you two officials the impacts of this language and if it's not already covered. Because if my rationale in thinking is that if a sector is already required to report whether or not they pay ransomware or not, the request would trigger the reporting or the breach would trigger the reporting in my understanding of it, but I'd like to know if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The Act indeed does seek to prevent any and all types of cyber security incidents, including but not limited to ransomware. The legislation as written would already capture ransomware incidents because ransomware is simply a form of malicious code that is used for a particular purpose, often extortion. So the Act would already give the government the ability to collect technical information to prevent, respond to, and recover from ransomware incidents. If we stop the malicious code from getting into our systems in the first place, then malicious actors won't have the opportunity to ransom us. Thank you.
So with that being said, Mr. Chair, I think, again, the intentions make a lot of sense, but if it's already covered within the rest of the Act, what I think this then poses to do is create, again, a 24-hour rule within a specific type of attack, which is ransomware, versus what we just discussed of having an overall regulation around timing of reporting for all activities. And I think if we start breaking breaking up these, cyber incidents and creating different standards for reporting, I think it will become confusing, and then that confusion could even cause to a lack of a sector knowing when to report what. So I think for clarity's sake, I feel comfortable that a ransomware attack would be covered on the reporting side of the rest of this legislation, and we don't need to isolate out and create a specific new reporting timeframe just for ransomware. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Shipley, anything further? Good. We shall vote. Show of hands in favor? Against? Defeated? BQ 15.
Et je vais retirer cet amendement.
I'm going to withdraw the amendment, Mr. Chair. We had already talked about this issue in the first part of the study. It has to do with proportionality and reasonableness, so I'm going to withdraw.
Thank you. You withdraw?
No, it's not-
Unanimous
it's not-
consent?
no, it's not.
Not moved at all. Okay, good. G14. If G14 is adopted, CPC 22 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. Any discussion? Did you have your hand up, Jen? No? Okay, good.
Someone else was jumping in? No?
Ms. O'Connell, please.
Thank you. Again, this is just creating a little bit more clarity and to keep in line with the intent of the legislation. And we heard concerns for sure about creating guardrails and transparency. So this just provides that additional language to make sure that it's reasonable grounds for an order, and then list some of the factors that might be considered. So again, it's just in relation to providing that clarity in the legislation that we always believed was the intent of the law, to give some reassurance to those who raise some concerns.
No further discussion. Shall G14 carry? CPC 22. Oh, sorry, hang on. 14. One,
yeah.
two. Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
go ahead, Ms. O'Connell.
Thanks. This is, I think we spoke about this in the first half of the bill, but it creates the obligation to notify NSECOP and NCIRA within 90 days of issuing of a cybersecurity directive. So just to refresh everyone's memory, what was of some concern was how would anyone know if a secret order is made while still maintaining national security protections? And also, I'm sure for certain sectors to provide, they don't want competitors to know necessarily of any gaps. So we felt this was a reasonable opportunity to provide NSECOP and NCIRA notice, and that they are the masters of what they study, but it would allow that preemptive kind of acknowledgement if an order is actually issued, to ensure that somebody knows to look for it and can look into it deeper with the protections of NSECOP and NCIRA that they have in dealing with sensitive information.
Shall G14.1 carry? G14.2. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. This, again, goes to, I think, the earlier point I made about this is not to expand surveillance purposes, and so it's to provide greater clarity around this language that the governor and council is not permitted to order any designated operator or class of operators to intercept a private communication. So again, and it goes on to list these things. So again, it's just making clear the intention of the bill is to collect data and not to create or expand any sort of surveillance powers.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. No further discussion. Shall G 14.2 carry? Yes. Carried. NDP 12. If NDP 12 is moved, CPC 23 cannot be moved as they are identical. Also, if NDP 12 is adopted, BQ 16 cannot be moved due to a line conflict.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We had this debate at a previous meeting. I'm going to raise it for the final time today. And if the committee decides that the argument holds merit, then we will continue the discussions. If not, I will withdraw the amendments. But this is a recommendation that comes from the coalition. We've had a variety of recommendations around this to not exempt this legislation from the Standing Joint Committee for the Scrutiny of Regulations.